Welcome everyone. My name is Stephanie Ivick and I'm in the marketing department here at eLearning Brothers. I'll be your host today. Today we are talking about creative ways to drive change in your organization. This session will be recorded and we'll send a copy of the recording out to everyone who registered, so you'll find that in your email later today. If you have any questions during the webinar, we'll be answering them through the questions panel and out loud during the webinar, so feel free to use that questions panel as you need it. We'll get to as many as we can, but if we can't get to it and we run out of time, we'll continue the conversation offline. Today we have Todd Cummings, Managing Director of Custom Solutions with us. Todd, thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to hear what you have to share. And without further ado, I'm gonna let Todd take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to do one of these. I did one a little while ago with my good friend Richard Bass and some others, and so this is my first one flying solo. So I hope that I do all right. Certainly, this is a topic that I'm passionate about and that I just love discussing, and that is really change inside of organizations. I've had the opportunity over the years before my career here at eLearning Brothers, as well as my continuing career here, to influence and have a lot of opportunities to see change inside of organizations, both from individual contributors, really all the way up to the vice presidents or CEOs inside of organizations. And so I'm very hopeful that some of the things that I share today will be beneficial for you and help you figure out what can I do in my own organization to try and influence and move some change forward. Because sometimes we feel like in our own organizations, I don't have the position to do this, I don't have the influence, I don't have the authority, perhaps I don't even know how to do it. And so how do I get that process started to try and be that change leader inside of the organization? And so the things that we're going to talk about today will give you some very simple but very foundational things that'll help you start to move that needle of change inside your organization. So what I want to start off really is just pull the curtain wide aside so that you can see the things that we're going to talk about right now. There's really three areas that I want to focus on today that, you know, as I've gone through all the different change materials over the years, as I've done consulting inside of organizations talking about change, as we've talked about it in ours, you know, we could talk about models, blogs, all the different things, but to me, it really comes down to just some critical components of it, and that's what we're going to spend a few minutes talking about today. And so the first one being, we've got to know ourselves before we can instigate change. We've got to know who we are before we can influence that change. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how do I know myself? What does that look like? Then we're going to spend some time talking about knowing the organization, because it's hard to influence change inside of the organization if you don't know how the organization will react, or if you don't even know what the organization is standing for. And so that's another critical component of this piece. And then finally, you have to have an idea of the change that you want to make. You can't just go in willy-nilly, so to speak, and say, woohoo, I'm going to change everything. You really have to know what that change is and where it needs to take place, how it needs to take place. And in my mind, pull those things together, they really create this really cool concentrical circle. I'm not even sure what that means, but it sounds cool. This concentrical circle that allows you then to do creative change inside the organization. And so that's where we're going to spend our time. Interestingly enough, as we look at the organization of eLearning Brothers, one of our foundational pieces, the reason it all started was because of change. We were looking to change learning experiences for people, much like, well, and I think all of us here, and probably many of you are familiar with Dr. Allen, and that's been one of his mantras for years and years, is trying to make training better. And we're going to talk about that in a little while, but trying to change the learning experience. And when Andrew and Sean actually started eLearning Brothers, that was their whole thought, was what do we do to make eLearning better? And as it started to grow inside of our organization, I think that continues to be one of the pieces of our culture that we look to do. That's where Rockstar came from. We're trying to change you into a rock star. And hopefully that's what you're trying to do with learning inside of your own organization as well, is change that to being a rock star. And so to that end, that's when we started building assets. We started putting together the different libraries. We started having our customization of courses, and then we began to provide off-the-shelf courses. So as we started pulling all those things together, again, it's to drive change in that learning experience inside of your organization. And so from a very real sense, that's what we are as eLearning Brothers, is that organization that's going to help you drive change inside the organization. But we're going to talk about some other elements and pieces of that to get there. So let's talk about that first one for just a few minutes. This is one of my favorite quotes out of Hamlet. And if you've ever watched Hamlet, you know, Polonius is giving this to his son Laertes, and it's probably in a little bit of a self-serving type of engagement. But he says, "This above all, to thine own self be true." Very much about self-awareness. Know who you are. And when you start to look at who you are, that then is what opens the doors to allow you to change, because oftentimes that change needs to take place in yourself, but you certainly have to be aware of, you know, what you're good at, maybe what you're not good at. What are some of the strengths that you bring to the organization? What are some of your gaps? What are some of your weaknesses? What are the things that you do that you're really good at? But what are the things maybe that maybe are overwhelming and loud to other people that you need to mitigate a little bit or bring down? And so you've got to know what those are. It's not just about your intelligence quotient, your IQ, but it's also about your social intelligence, your emotional intelligence rather. And there's a lot of literature and things out there on that. Goleman in particular, I think is really the initiator of that. He's done some of the seminal work on it. But that intelligence factor, that social intelligence factor, that emotional, the IQ, the EQ, the SQ, you've got to know where you stand on those different scales, because that's going to help you influence change inside of your organization, because people know who you are. And if you don't know who your own tendencies, your own preferences, and that makes it problematic when you're trying to introduce change. Let me give you an example. Inside of our organization, we do a lot of reviewing of people's resumes. We get tons of people that are asking to work for us, and it's an honor for us that so many people reach out to talk to us. But we'll ask them typically when they put their resume out there and they show all this myriad of different things that they're good at, and we say, what do you think that you're the best at? And let me just maybe use a graphic example. And they say, well, I'm really good at graphics. And then we put it in front of one of our graphics designers, and we're kind of like, well, maybe they should be a little more self-aware, because that isn't particularly their strength. But we find their writing samples to be really good. And so when we go back to them, we say, well, how do you feel about writing? Well, I'm not very good about writing. That makes it a little bit problematic for us to bring them inside the organization when they don't understand where their own strengths and weaknesses are. On the flip side, it's wonderful when we get people that do know themselves, and they'll be like, well, you know, as I look at my graphics, I'm really not good at it, but sometimes I'm put in that position. But my writing is really fantastic. And it's so good to interact with those, because they know how to leverage their own skills, and using that leverage and those skills that they have then allows them to further instigate change inside of the organization. And so with that in mind, and you may be thinking, well, how do I know myself then? What do I need to do with that? And there's actually a multitude of different tools and things that are out there. There's surveys, there's just one-on-one feedback. There's all kinds of interesting things that you can do to try and understand yourself better. So with that in mind, I want to do a quick poll here. I want to answer. I want to see out there from those of you that participate, how many of you have ever used a personality or a leadership profile of survey? This could be something you've done individually or right inside the organization. So if you could select one of those, let's take a look and see how many out there have started that pathway, if you would, of getting to know yourself a little bit better.
All right, early responses coming in are leaning very heavily toward yes. We have a very self-aware audience today.
That's fantastic.
All right, and I'm gonna close down the poll in just a second. So if you haven't voted yet, just click right on that box.
This is an easy one. You got a 50% chance of being right. So
I'll share the results right there.
Wow, that's fantastic. 86% of us. You know, I get a lot of people that ask me as well, you know, when we're looking at these self-awareness tools, you know, does that mean that's who I am? I'm locked in with that? And very much my take is the reason that you take these is to get a better understanding of yourself. It doesn't mean, you know, this is who I am. You know, I was just watching a movie the other day and reflect upon this as a kid in grade school. And you remember you took those career surveys as a kid in grade school, and it always showed that I was going to be a garbage collector or something. Actually, it really didn't, but I can't remember what it said. But I remember in the 3rd or 4th grade, you're thinking, oh man, that's what I'm going to do. Well, I don't want to do that. That's lousy. There's no way I want to do that. Well, these surveys at times may make us think that, oh, that's who I am. Well, I guess that's who I am. And in a sense, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so my take would be, don't get locked into that necessarily. But I want to also get a sense then, and maybe we can do another poll, is what are some of the surveys that you've taken? Because there's a couple of different tools that are out there. When we look at that, there's some very popular ones, certainly MBTI, there's DISC, there's Bono's hats, we've got a myriad of them. I just threw 3 of them up here. But I'd like to get a sense of what are the tools that you guys have used, if it's one of the 3 that I put up there, or perhaps another one that you've used. I want to get a sense of those that you've taken. And I just put up some of the personality ones. There's a multitude of leadership ones that are out there. So let's run that next poll question.
A couple in the questions panel. A lot of people have taken the DISC one, D-I-S-C, and also Zenger Folkman Extraordinary Leader. And I'll leave the poll open for a couple more seconds. So if you have any last minute votes you want to submit, now is the time.
Good. I've taken a lot of them, and I love taking them actually, because to me each one gives you a little bit different perspective, and I'm very much about data points. And the more data points you have, the more that you can start to formulate an opinion about yourself or an understanding about yourself. Oh, that's great. Strength Finders, MBTI. It looks like a large portion of us have done that. And a lot of others. That's good. We're pretty rounded then. And those 2 tend to be 2 of the ones that are very popular. Of course, MBTI has been around for a while. Myers-Briggs has, and Strength Finders is certainly one of my favorites. And strengths is one of the big buzzwords right now you see in this understanding yourself industry, these Strength Finders. And so that's good. However, regardless of the tools that you've used, remember that they just help you understand tendencies or preferences. They give you opportunities. They help you understand some of your skills. It doesn't define who you are. But when you understand those areas of how you tend to act or react, you now start to understand what are the things that I need to change, and what are the talents, what are the abilities, what are the strengths that I have that can help me influence change inside of an organization. I'll give you an example of that. As I consistently take the Strengths Finders one, I find that right in my top 5, my signature 5, if you would, is what they call it, I have WOO, which is winning others over. And that's one of my top 5. And there's certain skills and attributes that are associated with that. And I'm very much that way, right? So when I approach people or when I interact with them, that tends to be one of the things that comes out, is I'm doing everything I can to build that relationship in a positive way. However, a detriment can be, once I've won you over, I'm not really interested in you anymore. It's really impacted my marriage to a large. I'm just kidding. It really hasn't. But it's something I have to be aware of, that I tend to front end how I build relationships, and sometimes I don't do the job that I need to in grooming that relationship on a continual basis. And so there's an opportunity for me there. But knowing how I do that up front, I know that as I influence change, I want to make sure that I'm front loading as much as I can, because that's where my energy is. That's how I roll. And it could be different with you in some of the different ways that you look. And MBTI gives you a great perspective on, of course, those 4 different quadrants and sub-quadrants and sub-quadrants that you might perhaps influence. And so understand how you present, how you engage, how you react, because that's going to help you. If we don't understand ourselves, then in a very real sense, we're blind. And that leads me to just really this next little small model that I love, Johari's window. This has always been one of my favorites, because as I look at myself, I try to identify in each of these 4 quadrants, and to me this is kind of a fixed quadrant. And the ultimate goal is to shift that open quadrant so that it's expanding as your blind, your hidden, and your unknown are shrinking. All right, and so I love doing that. I love finding ways to expand my openness so that I know more and more about myself, and that others know more about me as well, because an important aspect of knowing yourselves is helping others know you also. For example, when things that I don't know about myself, but others know about me. I had a colleague once who we rode to work for several weeks together, and every single day he would ask me, "Hey, as you observed me yesterday, what did I do that what did I do that you noticed that maybe I didn't notice? What did I say? How did I act? How did I react? I'm looking for some insights on that. Well, over the couple of weeks, we got to the point where I'm like, bro, I can't tell you anything else, man. In fact, I'm tired of giving you feedback. Please quit asking me for feedback. But as we came around, he would share with me all those different things about himself that he didn't know how he acted in certain situations. And so his blind window began to shrink, his open window began to expand. It's a great tool. And you don't need to go online and take a survey and whatnot. It's just merely asking people, hey, what do you know about me? Don't be afraid of that. A lot of people get afraid of finding out things about themselves that they don't know, or they be very defensive. But again, you can't influence change in an organization unless you know those perceptions that other people have of you. There's a lot of hidden ones that are out there that we keep very close to ourselves, right? Some of them could be very intentional. Some of them may be unconscious. For example, I remember a time we were, as we were going through one of our first moves in our home, been married probably 3 or 4 years to my wife, and I pulled this flute case out of the closet. My wife's a wonderful musician, piano player, organ player, and I love to sit and listen to her. She's very talented. But I pulled this flute case out, and I'm like, oh my goodness, let's just take this down to the Salvation Army, down to the used store. And she's like, well, no, let's keep that. And I said, why? She said, well, I play the flute. And I'm like, I've been married to you 4 years or 3 years. I have no idea you play the flute. So she pulls the flute out, and I was amazed. But again, something that she knew that I didn't know that was hidden. And once I knew it, now it changes our relationship a little bit because, well, first of all, I start to realize how more talented musically she is than I had previously thought. And it was amazing. There's a lot of things in ourselves that we hide like that we don't always share, that if we actually did share and open up, might be to our benefit. So that's something to think about there. Those unknowns, to me, the more we are open with what we have, the more we're trying to get that feedback, that unknown window starts to shrink. The more different sources that we're getting our information from, again, that allows us to better understand ourselves, therefore helping us move along that line of influencing change inside the organization. Again, we can't change someone else, or we can't change a situation unless we know about ourselves and how we're to influence that. So it's a very simple perspective in terms of starting to understand that. It's also good to know not just about ourselves, but maybe the role that we play inside the organization. And so this is one of these models that I really like, the 4 stages of contribution. It's just a quick little one, and you can go online and actually get far more extensive information about this. But it's a great model that kind of identifies where are you at inside the organization? How are you contributing to other people? As you start to understand where you're at, you can move yourself along that needle, because you don't need to be a manager or a director to influence change inside the organization. You just need to understand where your role is, kind of as Covey says, so that you can understand how that sphere of influence can start to grow. And so as an individual contributor, if you just take that stage 1, and I'm contributing dependent on other people, I'm trying to learn my role and what I'm doing inside the organization. I'm primarily helping other people. My transition is trying to recognize how to help others. I'm supporting others. You have a role of change within that organization, within that role, if you would. You've got a sphere of influence that you can begin to change, those that are helping you, if you would. And the way you behave, and as you know yourself, you can change those behaviors that you have over time, again, helping you start to influence in your role. Interestingly enough, the more you influence change, the more you move along that linear model of the roles. And none of them, if you'll notice there in that bottom right-hand corner, do you have to be in formal leadership? Because this isn't about formal or informal leadership. It's about how you influence the organization. Again, critical to understand yourself before you start to influence change. Or I should say critical if you really want to be an influencer of change in the organization, that you know yourself. And certainly as you begin to craft or develop learning experiences inside your organization, you need to know what your own biases are, what your own styles are, etc. So some great information there. Hopefully it gives you a good stage to launch from in terms of knowing yourself. Any quick questions, Stephanie, that maybe we can respond to before we move to that next stage?
It looks like we don't have any questions other than people just wondering how you got to be so cool.
Well, you know, I did ask Stephanie to put my title as the coolest guy in the company, but she didn't, which is very telling. I'm clearly not as cool as I think I am. Let's go to this next one. This is a quote from Covey then that I really like. Bottom line, when people are crystal clear about what's most important or what the most important priorities in the organization are and their team, then they begin to work around those, understand them, contribute to them, allows them to be more productive. And then, as we all know with Covey and his 7 habits and his whole mantra, it just makes you a better person. It allows you to have a whole life, if you would. But I want to distill this for a reason that it makes you more productive organizations inside your organization. Organizational culture, structure, function, all of that influence our knowledge, or the knowledge that we need to influence change inside of an organization. If we don't know those elements of our organization, it's hard to try and impact that change inside of our organization. Early on, I know when Richard and I were really starting up, we had begun to work with a client who really wanted to change the engagement, or I should say their culture, change their customer service. So they asked us to come and build a whole series of customer service trainings, sales trainings, so that they could build those better relationships with their clients. Meanwhile, we noticed that this leader would walk in and no one would talk to him, and he wouldn't look at anyone. And when we called him out on it, he indicated that people were afraid of him a little bit, and he liked that. He liked that people had that little bit of fear in them. And we suggested that maybe that's not the best idea to change to a more customer service, customer experience culture, that his old employees kind of needed to have a good relationship with him. Nah, was his response. I kind of like that. And so at a certain point, we realized we really weren't going to create the learning experiences that we wanted. And so we ended up pulling out. It just wasn't a good fit for us. You've got to know that organization that you work with and those things that are going to work or not going to work. On the other hand, on a positive side, we've worked with organizations here that have been very collaborative, very open with us, work hand in hand with us to make some amazing and beautiful things. You know, calling out a particular client, our Sigma Chi clients and friends, they really have approached their training inside of their organization as one to try and build a more unified organization that attracts more young men into their fraternity, so that they can build better young men. And that's been their focus, and that's what they wanted. So as we've worked with them with building training, all the ideas that we've tried to innovate and share with them, as well as their own ideas and whatnot, have created a wonderful synergistic model with them. This was an organization that, as we got to know them, as they got to know us, we've created some beautiful things because we had a shared sense of value, a shared sense of culture, a shared sense of end goals, what we wanted. But we wouldn't have been able to do that had we not known them. And so that's an important thing to know. Know the organization that you're working in, or if you're more of a vendor, know that organization that you're working with, because you can't influence change inside that organization if you don't know what they're doing. So let's do another poll question. I'd like to understand how many of you know what your organization believes in. And if maybe you're a freelancer or an independent person that's working with organizations, the question would be maybe, how well do I know the organizations I'm working with? All right. So it might be the organization you're working in, could be the organizations you're with. Do you know things like their mission, their vision, their value? Do they have team charters? How much of those things do you know about your organization? Let's take a quick check on that.
All right, Todd, the votes are coming in.
If we hold true, most people don't have a high degree of familiarity with them. So I'm really interested to see
how our audience might be superior.
Well, there we are.
So far, it's looking like we have a pretty big chunk who knows their mission. I will say we're a little shaky on the team charters, it looks like. I'll leave the poll open for just another couple seconds, let anyone else show off their knowledge really quickly.
And that is true. The further down that chain you go, the less you know.
Let's take a look
about it, which is interesting, right? You would think you would know more locally than you do globally. That's fantastic. That's great. That's wonderful. It does my heart good to see that, because most of the organizations that I'm in, most of the people that I work with inside of organizations don't know those things. So if you do, that's fantastic. It gives you a great foundation to build on. Typically, the reason that team charters is low is because teams just don't have charters, which is too bad, because I think it's important that we have team charters, because then you know what your team does flows up into the organization. It's hard to understand my value in the organization as an individual if I don't know what my value is to the team, if I don't know what my value is to the organization. And so team charters are really important to have, and they could be, under different names or some such thing, but fantastic. That's great. That's good to know. Thank you
Todd,
for
we
that.
do have an
Here at
audience
eLearning
question.
Brothers.
Oh,
Oh,
I think you're
please,
about to
fire away.
answer the audience question. The audience would like to quiz you on whether or not eLearning Brothers has a vision.
That's a great question. I'm so glad that you asked, because that's a perfect segue into this. When we began to get rolling, we decided that, hey, we did want to have an understanding of what is it that we're aiming for, what are we stand for, what are we focused on, and what are our rules. And so we came up with our vision, we came up with our mission, what are our rules of rock in terms of the rock star thing. We created a whole platform around that really was reflective of teams. And then what are those cultural values that we share as an organization? So for example, as well, then as we go down that road, if we look at our vision was to create awesomeness. Simply put, that's what we wanted to do. We didn't want to be just good, as Colin said, we want to be great. When we started, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, one of the things that was big, of course, it was still the era of PowerPoint, and the common phrase was death by PowerPoint. Well, what we continue to see even today is death by e-learning, or death by learning. You're just sitting and looking at PowerPoints, or you're just going through boring e-learning. It's horrible. And so we set out to change that. Once again, we wanted to change that, and we knew what we could do. We could put assets, tools, courses, relationships, opportunities out there that could create awesomeness. And so that became our mantra. Our vision is about change itself, moving from bad or good to awesome. That's what we wanted to do. We didn't want people or ourselves to be stuck in those same old models or mantras. And sometimes it's just a little thing that can cause a great change. I can't express the number of times where we've presented an e-learning to a client, and all we did was change some of the graphics, or all we did was add audio, or all we did was swap out what we thought was a fairly small thing, and the client came back and they were like, that's amazing, that's incredible. And it was just one small little change. And so when you as an individual contributor, or whatever your level is inside of the organization, or an influencer outside of the organization, it's important for you to realize that you could create this awesomeness regardless of where you're at. And sometimes it's just by a small thing, a small change of direction, right? And that's what Andrew and Sean initially, as they began to put together these assets, that was their goal, was to provide people those tools that they needed to change inside of the organization, to become awesome. Well, okay, we knew we wanted to be awesome, but then we thought, okay, let's drill that down a little bit. Let's talk about how do we do that? And so we created our mission statement, which supported that vision, which was, we delight our customers with deeply immersive and visually explosive learning experiences. Now, I will say this was geared more toward the custom side of our business versus the product side of our business. Nonetheless, it can equally apply across the board, I think, for us. And you'll notice those highlighted words in there. We wanted to create awesomeness through delightful experiences that created deeply immersive and visually explosive learning experiences. And that's how we're going to do it. Now, we try to trickle that down through all of our people and emphasize that in all the things that we do, so that anyone side of our organization knows that they have that power, they have that opportunity to do all of these things. Hey, what am I supposed to do with this training? Well, you're supposed to create deeply immersive and visually explosive experience with that training. Okay, great. Now, based on what they know about themselves, right, they can go and make this change inside the training, which now will impact another organization and will probably impact ours. And so we try to keep that open platform with our mission for all of our people, so that they know it's their responsibility to change our organization through this mission right here. And hopefully in your organization, as you look at your vision and your mission, you see, what are those windows that I have that I can change the organization with? And that's going to be the critical element, I think, of how you drive change inside of your organization, is doing it through what are the mission, what are the vision, what are the values that I have, what are the different team elements, and this can also be culture as well, right? Because sometimes you'll see culture that doesn't align with missions. In fact, that's frequently the case. The example that I just cited a few minutes ago about that organization was very much the case. And we go inside of organizations where they seem very focused on this, but then when we get to boots on the ground, so to speak, we find that what they've told us isn't exactly what's going on. And that's good for us to know, because again, that's part of getting to know the organization. That's part of understanding how you can influence the change inside of the organization. And again, that's important for you to know. So understand not just the organizational logistics in terms of the tactical stuff, mission statement, vision, but also understand what that culture is. And we could go on and on about culture, because that's another big piece of mine. Intentional culture or informal culture, unintentional culture. Regardless, when you look at how culture is viewed, and it just continues to gain more and more steam when you look throughout all the literature and all the new stuff that comes out from leadership surveys or leadership magazines and articles and books, it's still very pronounced upon culture, and that is a vital part of the organization. So while you may know the mission and the vision and the values and those other elements, what do you know about the culture of your organization? Because that's as important as those other pieces, right? Your strategy is often comes through your mission and your vision and certainly your values. Your culture, however, sometimes is entirely different. It reminds me of the part out of A Few Good Men where Tom Cruise, the lawyer, is going up to the I think it's the sergeant, Kendrick, I think is what it is, and he throws the books in front of him and he says, "Hey, tell me where you're supposed to go eat." And Kendrick's like, "Well, it doesn't tell me where I'm supposed to go eat." So he pulls another set. "Hey, this is the Marine Coat of Arms," and goes through all these different sets of books. It's like, "So wait a second, how do you eat at that camp?" And he's like, "Well, you just know. We just go there." And he's like, and of course, that went to the whole Code Red, and we all know and love that sequence of events as it unfolds in the movie. But his point was there are things that happen inside of organizations that aren't always in the books. That's the culture. Those are the artifacts inside of your organization, the cultural elements that influence and move you. And so it's important that you know those, because that's also what helps you navigate how you can do change inside of the organization. Maybe it's very hierarchical, and that's not always in the books, right? So you got to go up through a boss. Maybe there's an influencer inside the organization that you know about, who you can approach and you can work with them, and then they influence. Maybe you're that influencer. Maybe there are certain processes that you have to go through in an organization to affect that change. Regardless, a lot of those aren't found in those tactical or books that we found. They're in that culture that you have to get to know inside of either your organization or the ones that you're working with. So anyway, important for you to understand that in terms of your organization. And so we've now, I think, established two core foundations. You've got to know yourself. What do you bring to the table? You've got to know your organization, both the core elements, the strategic elements, as well as that cultural response. Once you begin to know those, and actually I shouldn't say once, because all three of these I think really go together. It's an evolving circle. As you get to know those elements, now you can start to say, okay, what are now the influences and the changes that I can make inside the organization? Which leads us to our third piece. Love this thought from Darwin, which is basically what Darwinism is based on. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. And it's hard to be responsive to change when you don't see those changes that need to take place, or you don't know where and how you can change. And so for organizational survival, if you would, or organizational Darwinism, this is one of the key pieces that you've got to know, which is how and where do I influence inside my organization? Sure, but what do I influence, or what can I change? And with so much technology and everything's changing all the time, and of course we see that in our industry, right, with the learning, all the different tools that are coming out, all the different platforms, the innovations, all these things are always changing. And if we aren't keeping up with them, then we get lost in the shuffle. Certainly at eLearning Brothers, that's a huge piece of our, hopefully our differentiation is that we're always trying to stay out in front of that. We're always trying to know what are the latest tools and how are they being used, and how can we use these tools to try and influence change inside of the organization? Or how can we use these tools to help individuals influence change inside of the organization? And so it's important that you know what level can I influence inside of my organization. So let's do another quick poll. If you look at maybe what you're trying to do inside of your organization, and I'm guessing that's one of the reasons you came to our webinar today, what kind of change are you trying to implement in your organization? Is it a global? Is this something that's regional, maybe local, or just team? Maybe it's a personal change that you're trying to implement and move forward. I want to get a sense of what each of us is trying to influence. What level are we at? Take a minute and just check all those that apply inside of your organization. Let's see how ambitious we are with our changes.
Well, Todd, right now it looks like we've got a pretty close tie between global and local change. You can still keep voting right there in the box on your screen. I'll leave this open for a few more seconds. Oh, there's been a strong surge for regional.
They heard you.
Yeah, they heard me and they changed their votes.
Oh, yes, I see. Can they do that? Can they change their votes?
No, you cannot change your votes.
Oh, so once you've done it, you're locked.
Yeah, you're committed. You're on the path to change.
Yeah, or you're on the path to not
give
change.
it one more
Good.
second, and then I will close the poll and share the results with everybody. Last minute voters. All right, let's take a look.
All right, yeah. Local, a lot of local. Well, you know, and there's that quote that all change is local, right? That's what we see. So we could say all change is local, and that's where it starts, right? Because it starts with you. But ultimately, if you're trying to influence that global change, then it depends on what level you're at. If you're a VP or an individual contributor, change is hard no matter where you're at inside the organization. Don't let anyone fool you about that. Say, oh, it has to start at the top and that's the easiest, or oh, it's grassroots and that's the easiest. I've seen it come from both directions, and none of it's ever easy. So that's why there's such an industry around the change management, because there's so many suggestions and so many models to influence how you use your organization, or you leverage change in your organization. All those different models, you know, you've got the cutter model, you've got the start, stop, continue model, you've got the change curves, you've got appreciative inquiry, you've got everything, and there's dozens and dozens of these. And some of them focus on financial, some of them focus on technology, some of them focus on management and leadership, some of them's process structure. Again, it's overwhelming at times, kind of like, you know, Googling something in the internet, and you've got 11 bazillion different things you can tap from. And I think the piece that I want to say to this, because I'm not here to say this model works or that model works, because there's a lot of the different models that I do like, and I use them based on different situations or different places, and based on the change that I'm trying to do, right? Whether it's a local or a regional or global, there's different tactics or tools that I may use for those different things. And you know, certainly if you want to reconnect, we can talk about some of those models and some of the different things. But I just wanted you to know that none of them are necessarily the best, but likewise, none of them are necessarily the worst. Even though competitively, you may see many of them saying, "Oh, don't use that model; it doesn't apply." Blah blah blah. It's not this, that, or the other. And my take is, again, this is kind of like with the tools that we talked about on the know yourself, the personal side, is they're all pretty good. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve, and it depends on who you are. And again, you can see how all three of these really come together. Pros and cons, do's and don'ts, strengths and weaknesses, similarities and differences. As you get into that, you'll start to understand that, but you'll also understand, okay, what's working for me. We worked with a CEO one time who wanted to change, but didn't want to create a panic inside of the organization. But he really liked this appreciative inquiry model. He really liked this cutter model. And he was like, is it okay if we like them both? And I think, well, absolutely. Let's take elements from this. Let's take elements from that. And let's create our own hybrid solution that we do over 3 years. And that's what we rolled out to. In a sense, we found what was our best fit from what the best practices are. In other words, best practice that you read out there, all the new bestsellers and all the, you know, there's 57 new CEOs that touted this book or this practice. Just because it's the best practice and 57 CEOs touted it doesn't mean it's going to be the best fit for you or for your organization. And that's what I want to emphasize when it comes to change inside of your organization. Identify what change you want to make, what level you're at. Go out there and look at some of the stuff. But remember, there's probably not one that's going to fit you like a glove. Probably not going to happen. In fact, I haven't seen it in the years. I've seen people try to do it, and usually by luck, it works. Well, I shouldn't say usually, because usually change doesn't work. The vast majority of times, change doesn't work. So certainly don't get discouraged if your first attempt at changing something doesn't work, because that's really the norm. But look for those things that fit for you. It's okay to take something from here, to take something from there, and to create your own little tossed salad of tomatoes and spinach leaves and lettuce and broccoli and put them together. It's perfectly all right. Sometimes that's what makes the best change process, is one that you've created, because you know yourself, you know the organization, and you know the change you're trying to make. So don't be afraid of pulling together different things that work. It's okay. It's what I do as I interact inside our organization as well as others. I look for what's going to fit. What do I think might work? I think a key to remember, though, is when you're looking at change, there's two types of change, and of course there's a multitude, but for me, you're always moving as an individual. You're either moving forward or you're moving backward. So you're progressing or you're regressing. And that's what change is, really, right? You're moving forward or you're moving back. We never stay the same. Organizations never stay the same. Changes never stay the same. It's always moving one way or another. We control that with what we're doing, with our actions, regardless of whether you are in the where you are in the organization. You control that change, right, for yourself. So just like the change that you want to make, hopefully you're changing yourself to constantly move forward. If you do that in and of itself, it's going to be a positive change. It's going to be a positive movement inside of the organization. So make those small things that you can, those small adjustments, if you would, to get where you need to be. Again, just kind of wrapping up here again, 3 steps: knowing yourself, and we talked a little bit about that. How do I know myself? What are the tools? Knowing your organization. Again, how do I get to know my organization, and some different tools there and different ways that you can do that through culture and strategy and such. And finally, how do I know what kind of change I want to make? And then how do I do that? And looking at some of the different models and pieces there. If you're looking for small changes, eLearning Brothers, of course, has great experiences that we can help you create, either through some of the existing tools that we've got, or additional courses or custom stuff that we can do. But that's what our job is, really, is to help you change in your organization. So do what you need to do. Build it yourself, get someone to build it, do something a little bit different as you start to find out about yourself and your organization and the change, but just do something, move forward, progress, don't regress. And with that, my friends, that's my simple solution to creative change inside of your organization. Knowing yourself, knowing your organization, and knowing the change. That's how you make a creative change inside your organizations. Whew. Well, Stephanie, that kind of wraps up what I've got. Do we have any questions or any additional thoughts or comments about this? What are we looking at?
All right, Todd, we do have a couple questions here. So let's see. How do you approach making changes with leaders who are old school and don't like change and moving forward? It's a toughie.
It's a great question, and I would posit actually that most people don't like change because it doesn't work, and most old people don't like change. And I say that being an old person myself. We don't like it because, remember, their value is typically couched in their experience. And so anytime there's a change in an organization, it is potentially threatening their role, threatening their position, threatening their authority, because it's something new, it's something different. They can't rely on their experience to get them through it anymore. And so in a sense, they're feeling like, I'm going to lose a little credibility here because I don't know about this change. I don't know what it's going to do. I'm entering uncharted territory. And so they're threatened by that change. And so one of the best things to do is start to look and say, how do I create this a safe place, if you would? How do I put this individual in a non-defensive position where they can be comfortable knowing that, hey, this is not going to impact your credibility. It's not going to impact the role that you play inside the organization. And if it does, that's a whole other conversation, right? But that's what you've got to do, is create an atmosphere and environment where they feel comfortable and they don't feel fear, because that's why they don't want to embrace this change. And so that might mean explaining the change, pulling them aside and letting them know there's lead time before the change impacts them, so that they've got time to adapt. Because typically, again, these old people or more experienced people, once they get to know the change and understand it, they're the ones that tend to be the champions of it and the forerunners and the best instigators of it. You just have to put them in that position. I hope that's helpful. That's what I would suggest for that one.
I think that's a great answer. Or you could go the route suggested by attendee Ben, make changes and ask for forgiveness later. And we have a couple
That's the
more
one I
questions.
use at home. That's the one I use at home, but it doesn't always work.
So take that one with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
We had one
The
question.
forgiveness bank account starts to shrink. So, yeah.
Are there
Been there.
times when it's best to lay low instead of being a change agent or, as some might say, troublemaker?
Absolutely. It's kind of like conflict. Sometimes conflict is good. Sometimes you want to lay low. Sometimes you want to be that influencer of change. Sometimes you do want to lay low. And I would say particularly at a time where maybe there's a lot of change going on and you want to get a sense of maybe who those change leaders are, maybe what are the key changes that are going to take place. So sometimes it might be a good strategy to say, hey, I'm gonna just kind of lay low. I want to get a sense of things, patterns. Maybe it is. I want to get a sense of how things are flowing so that then I can get it. So to me, it's that second element that we talked about, which is knowing your organization. Because if you know your organization and start to understand that, you'll know when the appropriate time to lay low is and when the appropriate time to step forward and become a change leader is. So absolutely, you bet.
Yeah, great response. And I think that kind of segues into our next one. This goes back to when you were talking about knowing the mission. What's the best way to communicate misalignments with a mission? Our attendees in an instructional design role, and they're seeing training requests with timelines and budgets that are just substandard. And how can they communicate those up the chain to say that those solutions are violating their own mission?
That's a great one. It's kind of like calling someone's baby ugly. You got to be very careful with that. And a big piece of it is that phrase that I used at the very beginning, which is the help me understand. That really is a key phrase. And so it may be, well, it may be you don't have the big picture. That might be one thing, because certainly if we don't have the big picture, that taints how we approach things. And so I might say approach someone of influence, inside the organization, might be your boss, might be someone else, and use that phrase. I'm noticing a couple of contradictions here. Again, don't say there's, organizations whack, we're doing things completely wrong. You don't take a negative spin to it, right? And this is where you've got to know yourself, because sometimes we go in and we're, guns and thunder, and we're all negative and whatnot. We have to look at how we're approaching that. And so we've got to know ourselves a little bit. And then we've got to know who inside the organization might help me. What might be the influencer inside the organization? Again, whether it's my manager or whomever, and lay that out. Say, here's what I'm seeing. Help me understand what I'm missing, or help me understand how this is happening. And what can we do about that? Because this is what I'm seeing, and this is it. And then let them talk. Allow them to talk, and then ask those questions in that. That's a starting point. I will say this, at times inside of organizations, that misalignment is all the way at the top. And if this type of up the chain using, trying that alignment, trying to use influencers doesn't work, it may just be you have cognitive dissonance inside the organization, and it might be the wrong organization for you. I've certainly seen that countless times where people are like, this is what they're saying, this is what I'm seeing, and it's just not jiving, and how do I do it? And so we talk through strategies like we have. At the end of the day, things don't change. Sometimes that is what it is. But we do the little things inside of our sphere of influence, and Covey does a great job talking about this, to try to influence that change. And it's usually identifying individuals that we know can influence change or that can help us understand, and then trying to expand that on up the chain of command until a change is made.
Great. And I think you also just answered our last attendee question, which was, when and how do you know when change cannot be achieved? And it sounds like you kind of just answered that with the last one. Sometimes it goes all the way to the top.
You start to do those steps or those different things. And again, sometimes change isn't, and then you've got to make a decision inside the organization. Is this the right organization for me? And sometimes, unfortunately, it's not. It might be a great organization on the outside, but then when you get inside, there's a little thing. But then you also have to look, am I going to throw away the whole apple because I see one worm? Or can I eat all around that worm and still have a great experience? And so you know, that's again a whole other
In the
line of
instance of
things that
apples,
we can
no.
talk about.
No, you cannot.
It's
All
such a
right.
beautiful shiny apple. I just want to eat it.
No. Well, that is all the questions we have. Todd, thank you so much. This has been great. I believe you have one last slide to show everybody.
Yeah, if you'd like to have that opportunity to visit about, hey, what could eLearning Brothers, how could eLearning Brothers help me change? What are some of the things that you guys have to offer? Or just have a jam session about change or something, feel free to cut me an email. Happy to have those conversations. Unfortunately, I don't have infinite amount of time, but I'm always happy to try and conduct a discussion however best we can. So thank you very much
All
to
right.
everybody for being part of this. I hope it was beneficial.
It was great. Thank you so much, everyone. You'll get the recording in your emails. And as Todd said, feel free to email him with any questions. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.